Hello, welcome to the DraftKings Daily Trot. I'm Big Italy 42. He's Scott Mailwig at Sports 25 to Life. We're talking about tonight's action, of course, on DraftKings, and a big slate as it always is on Tuesdays, and some better pitching options tonight, but still no locks. Nobody that's a big favorite. Matt Shoemaker, the biggest favorite, and he's not a guy that you have any sort of confidence in. I doubt he has much confidence in himself right now, anyway. So, a guy that I really like. I'm not going to start at the top. I'll start it with a guy I like in the middle. Brett Anderson, $7,400 at Atlanta. Atlanta, second worst team in the majors against left-handed pitching. They're terrible, and Anderson's a guy that even when he's not good, he usually isn't going to implode. Usually he's going to get you about 15 to 20 DraftKings points. So he's the guy that at 7,400, maybe not your SP1, but definitely is your SP2. I like him a lot against that just awful offense right now.
Yeah, he's been pretty solid. Like you mentioned, at worst, he's been pretty average. At best, he's been pretty solid. I mean, he had 17 strikeouts combined in 2 starts recently. He's gone 7 innings in 3 of the last 4, I think 5 of the last 7. I mean, he's just a rock-solid option today at that price. He's a guy I'm going to be using quite a bit in cash games also. My favorite pitcher today is Waka. 8,700 on DraftKings, facing the White Sox. They haven't been very good. I know Waka hasn't been a big strikeout guy this year, but at 8,700, he's a pretty small favorite, but he's been really solid lately. He hasn't been great. Like I mentioned, hasn't been striking out a ton of guys, but 20-plus DraftKings points in 5 of the last 7. Pretty solid option. Only 8,700. He's a guy I'm going to look at quite a bit. The other guy in that price range I like quite a bit is Chris Heston, who is, I mean, he's been so inconsistent, but when he's good, he's been really good. And I really like this matchup at San Diego. San Diego was okay last night, but for 8,200, I think you can do a lot worse than Heston at San Diego in Petco against a Padres offense. It just hasn't been very good lately.
Yeah, I like that a lot too. I'm a big fan of Heston tonight. He hasn't given up a home run since a start in Coors Field on May 23rd. So this is a guy who keeps the ball in the ballpark. He can pitch deep into games. We know he's got upside. We saw that no-hitter against the Mets, so I like him as well. I still like Jacob deGrom, probably more in tournaments just because he's opposed by Joe Ross, pretty highly touted prospect. Expect to do big things, and as we know, the Mets aren't very capable of scoring runs to help anyone out. And Washington got to Matt Harvey last night, but DeGrom's been, if you ask me, a better pitcher than Harvey has this year. So, I think he's a fine GPP option. I just don't know that I'm going to be paying $11K for him in my cash games.
Yeah, I feel the same way about DeGrom. I definitely like him more than I liked Harvey last night, but there's also some other stronger options than there were outside of Harvey last night. So you already mentioned Joe Ross. I think he's a pretty solid option today at 5,000 on DraftKings, facing the Mets. Hasn't made a start in a couple weeks, but his last 2 starts that he did make on the 19th and the 13th, he was really, really solid. 7 1/3 innings, 11 strikeouts against Pittsburgh. Prior to that, 8 innings, 8 strikeouts against Milwaukee. He's looked great. I obviously can't expect him to be that good every time out as such a young guy, but, I mean, we know the upside's there. He's a really solid strikeout guy. He can obviously go deep into games. Only went 5 innings in his first start. He might be a little bit less stretched out than he was in those last 2, so I'm thinking probably around 6 1/3, something like that today, assuming he's got it going. Maybe a little bit longer, but I don't think they're going to go too crazy with him considering he hasn't made a start in 3 weeks.
Yeah, and it's a great matchup for him coming right back up to face the Mets, so you got to like that. Outside of that, that's pretty much all the pitcher options that I'm a fan of tonight. You could throw out Danny Salazar as well for tournaments. Not a guy that I feel great about in cash games, of course, because we know he's got struggles with the long ball. Obviously, in Miller Park, that's not going to be a good environment for him there. But finished the first half strong against Oakland, so definitely a guy with some big-time upside in your tournaments. So.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, catcher options tonight. Of course, you want to look at Coors Field when you can. So you've got guys like Michael McHenry, Nick Hundley. Obviously, McHenry, as I always note, is much better against lefties than Hundley is. But seems like Hundley is the guy that usually gets the nod. McHenry doesn't play very often. So keep your eye on that and see who's in the lineup. A guy that was in the lineup last night had a decent game. Tomas Talis $3,500. He gets Kyle Kendrick. I mean, I don't care who's playing against Kyle Kendrick. If my mom was playing against Kyle Kendrick, I'd play her. So 3,500. I think he's a fine option also. And then once again, the guy who everyone was on last night had an okay game. Kyle Schwarber, price went down a little bit, $3,200. Faced off against Raisel Iglesias, who isn't a guy that you're trying to shy away from at all.
Nope. He's another option for me tonight. The only other guy I think you didn't mention that I'm going to be looking at is Matt Wieters at 3,200 against Eovaldi.
Yeah, that's a good call there. Eovaldi, it's not a good situation for him. He's been absolutely terrible against lefties this year, so I like that call a lot. First base options, I really like Victor Martinez, even though he's not really a first baseman. He's $3,800. He's still too cheap. Gets a fine match against Taijuan Walker, who was good for a little stretch and then bad right before the break. So I think he's a nice discounted option there. Albert Pujols hit like 7 home runs yesterday in that doubleheader. I think it was actually 3, but he's just absolutely on fire right now. He's going to be a popular play. If you're playing a bunch of tournaments, definitely get yourself some exposure there. Elsewhere, I really like Prince Fielder as a lefty against Kyle Kendrick because last night it was lefty-lefty. He had a fine game, 2 for 4, 3 RBIs, but 5,200 is pricey. But like we mentioned, we're really not paying up at pitcher, so you can get a ton of great hitters today. And I think that Prince Fielder is going to be one of the guys I like to pay for tonight.
Yeah, definitely. Fielder and Rizzo are the two guys I'm looking at expensive-wise at first base. Outside of that, not a ton else I love. Justin Bour is a guy I'll look at for pretty cheap. Only $3,000 against a righty in Hellickson at Arizona. I think that's a pretty solid cheap play if you're looking for one at first base. Willen Rosario against a lefty. I don't know if we mentioned him at catcher too much, but he's a solid play at both catcher and first base on DraftKings. That catcher eligibility is great there. Only $3,000. Outside of that, I'm probably sticking to those guys. There's not a ton else I like. Chris Davis will be a GPP play for me at Yankee Stadium with that short porch in right field, facing a fairly weak righty. The Yankees I'm probably going to avoid for the most part today because they face a lefty, but I don't mind Teixeira, although 4,500 probably not going to find his way into too many of my lineups.
Yeah, I like those. And there's one more guy I'll throw out. I probably prefer him in the outfield, but Brandon Moss, 3,800 at Miller Park against Matt Garza, who he's pretty bad against everyone right now. We know that Moss has some power.
Yep.
Second base options, Rougned Odor is only $4,000, a nice discount. Should be batting second against Kendrick. I'm sure he'll be a popular play now that he's not a lefty-lefty. He does much, much better against righties, so I like him a lot. I still like Brian Dozier in the righty-righty matchup against Matt Shoemaker. Mentioned how bad Shoemaker's been recently, and Dozier's been hitting everyone, so I like him as a tournament option as well. And then kind of hard to overlook Robinson Cano right now, the way he's hitting. Shane Green, also one of the worst in the entire league against lefties. Absolutely terrible. A 420 WOBA allowed. So $3,900 for Cano. He's probably going to be a popular play as well.
Yeah, I don't mind him. I'll probably look at Kipnis a little bit. Jose Altuve facing a lefty for Boston is a solid play, especially in GPPs at 4,500. That's pretty much where I'm going to be looking at. The only other guy I'm really looking at second base is Ben Zobrist against Mark Burley.
Yep, I knew it was coming. I knew you'd mention Ben Zobrist as you do, and if you didn't, I was going to. But definitely Ben Zobrist. He's nice and cheap, $3,700. Nice value for you there. Third base options, of course. There's the big bats in Coors Field again. Nolan Arenado had himself a really hot start last night.
Yep.
Got that 2-run double in the first inning. Did nothing after that, but really nobody for Colorado did after that. So $5,000, he's a fine play against a lefty at home. Adrian Beltre against Kyle Kendrick, of course, is in play. Todd Frazier, same price as Beltre, homered last night, had himself a big game, 2 hits and a walk, so I think he's a fine play as well. If you want cheap, there's one cheap guy I really like. It's David Freese. He's starting to hit well. Gets Kyle Gibson tonight, $3,200. If you need a cheap option, I like him. That Angels offense is really heating up right now.
Yeah, the other guy I like as a relatively cheap option at third base, Justin Turner is only $3,200 against the lefty today. I think he's a fine play also.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I'll throw out Kyle Seager as well. Probably more of a tournament option at $4,200. But once again, Shane Green terrible against lefties. So, all right, shortstop. Everyone told us that Troy Tulowitzki had a terrible head cold last night. Maybe it affected him for one at-bat, but he homered in his second at-bat. Homers in 3 of his last 4 games now. Now he gets a lefty at home who's only made 1 start this season, who was terrible in that start. And he's only $4,600, so especially in cash games. Like I said yesterday, he's going to be all over my cash games, and I'm probably going to play him in just about every lineup because he's by far the top option tonight.
Yeah, I mean, the only other guy I'm really even considering close to him is Johnny Peralta against the lefty, and for 200 less, I'd rather play Tulowitzki against the lefty in core. So, I mean, I think Tulo's going to be probably 50+% owned tonight, especially after hitting a home run last night. I just don't see a way you can really avoid it unless you're just trying to go contrarian there. And, I mean, I don't mind Peralta. I think he's a fine play. I just don't think he's nearly as good a play as Tulowitzki. If you're trying to find someone really cheap, Andrew Romine's been hitting 7th for the Tigers with Cabrera out. He's flat 2,000. I think he's an okay play. If you want to go back to the Brad Miller well against Shane Green, who's been struggling, he's 3,300. Although he was not good last night.
No, not at all. And I'll throw out one more guy. Obviously, this is just still being contrarian, but he's got significant upside. Maybe not quite Tulo, but pretty close actually. Carlos Correa at home against the lefty, making his first start. He's been crushing lefties since he came up, but he's also more expensive than Tulo, so keep that in mind. Tulo's still the play, but if you're playing someone else, I'm with you. I think it's got to be Peralta, or maybe you play Correa in a tournament.
Yeah, and I'll obligatory mention Cesar Hernandez again at 2,700. Yeah. He had another really strong game last night. Second base, shortstop eligible. You're going to find somewhere to play him at some point, I imagine, tonight.
Yeah, that's a good point. I should have mentioned him at second base. Good save there. Outfield options. Charlie Blackmon and Carlos Gonzalez are in a lefty-lefty matchup, but it's a bad lefty. Blackman's been significantly better against lefties than Gonzalez has. Gonzalez has been just god-awful against lefties. Not to say that I'm not playing him, but saying I don't think he's necessarily a must-play. Yeah. Charlie Blackmon's $5,700 tonight against lefty. That's a pretty steep price tag for him.
Yeah, I think you're going to want to go more towards the Texas side in that game, outside of maybe Arenado and Tulo. Yeah. A couple of guys I like in the outfield today. Puig is only 3,100 against a lefty. I think he's a strong play. If you're not playing Brett Anderson, Johnny Gomes at 2,500 against a lefty. He's been absolutely terrific against lefties as usual. 2,500 is just an absolute steal for him. Seth Smith is another guy I like a decent amount if he's hitting in the top 5 in the order. 3,300 against Green. Like you mentioned, he's a guy we're going to be targeting a lot today with some Seattle bats, especially from the left side of the plate.
Yeah, good call. I like Andrew McCutchen as well against Jason Vargas, the lefty. McCutchen's really been hitting the ball well, and obviously Vargas, not even maybe completely healthy, not a good lefty to begin with, so I like him. You mentioned the Texas side of the ball there. Josh Hamilton, 4,500 is a nice option. Probably more expensive than you'd like to pay for him, but it's still Kyle Kendrick, and I mean he's bottom 3 pitcher in the league if you ask me, especially in Coors Field. Because the other options, I mean, you've got Delino DeShields, but he's also 4,500. If he's not stealing bases, he doesn't have a whole lot of value there. Chu probably won't play, it looks like. Ryan Rua had an okay game last night. He's $3,000. Another cheap way to get yourself some exposure. But once again, he strikes out a ton. So we'll see if he's even in the lineup tonight at all.
Yeah, you mentioned McCutchen. Starling Marte is another Pirates guy that just crushes lefties. I think he's a really strong play at 4,300. Michael Brantley I like against Garza today quite a bit, although he's a little pricey at 4,700. You can probably go back to the Cubs stack again today. Most of their outfielders are priced pretty well. Fowler's only 3,800. I want to say Coughlin's only around 3,000, although I'm not seeing him on my list right now.
32.
Okay, yeah. So, I mean, that's another stack you can look at again today. They were okay last night. Not particularly great, but there can always be a ton of home runs in Cincinnati there. And there's one other guy that I had that I really liked.
Was it Gerardo Parra?
No, it was Scott Van Slyke for 2,600 against Wood.
Good call.
That was the other one.
That's really cheap, yeah. Yeah, you got to like that against the lefty. And then I do like Gerardo Parra. Danny Salazar, he's a fine strikeout pitcher, but hasn't been great otherwise at times this season. And 3,500, I think he makes for a fine option for cheap as well.
Yeah, one more cheap guy I have. I think he's the last one on my list. Travis Snyder against Eovaldi, another lefty in Yankee Stadium. Only 2,900. I think he's a really solid play at that price also, although we have a lot of cheap outfield plays on the board today, so probably not a guy I'll be using a ton of.
Yeah, that's a good point there. And with that, that's going to wrap things up. Thanks for hanging out with us. Find us on Twitter at DF Cafe. Subscribe to our YouTube channel And check out our Colossus, our Optimizer, our cheat sheets, a lot of great content at dailyfantasycafe.com.